I bought that house specifically for the pool, that deep, crystalline patch of sapphire blue in a beige California tract. But my neighbor, Brenda, the neighborhood's resident Karen, had decided it was merely an extension of her own lackluster backyard. 3 weeks. 3 agonizingly loud, unauthorized pool parties, complete with shrieking children and that god-awful, tinny pop music blasting from a speaker I swear was built to violate decibel limits. Are you actually serious? I thought, slamming my screen door shut again, the sound barely audible over the whoops of 20 strangers splashing in my water. The main conflict wasn't just the trespass. It was the absolute casual dismissal of my property, my privacy, and my repeated polite requests, which were always met with a chilling, entitled smirk and the dismissive wave of a manicured hand. The tension between us had become a thick, sticky haze, worse than the July heat. I remember standing by my fence line one Tuesday, the metallic tang of chlorine blending sickeningly with the cloying scent of cheap Hawaiian tropic sunscreen wafting over the chain link, and feeling a low, continuous rumble in my chest. Pure, unadulterated frustration. When I had tried to explain the liability, the cost of chemicals, the sheer rudeness of inviting a bounce house rental guy to park his truck in my driveway again, she just tilted her head, sunglasses perched perfectly, and said, "Oh, honey, relax. We're borrowing, not stealing. It's a pool. Pools are meant to be shared. It's the neighborly thing to do." Neighborly? Couldn't they just not? That conversation ended with a defeated, almost physical sigh escaping my lips, a sound of resignation that instantly ignited a cold, hard resolve. I walked away from the fence, the hollow thump of a volleyball hitting the concrete grating on my nerves, and my brain started running the numbers. I called the pool company. I asked about the main drain valve, its capacity, and the biggest submersible pump they sold. I learned about gallons per minute, about emergency overflows, and about the surprising speed with which a backyard oasis could become a swamp. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was about boundaries, about justice, about the sheer principle of ownership. I spent 2 days setting up the system, hidden deep in the bushes behind the pool equipment shed, running a massive hose discreetly under the deck to the storm drain far down the street. The heavy, industrial pump hummed softly when I tested it, a beautiful, deadly purr. I felt a surge of adrenaline, cold and clean, cutting through the anxiety. Then came Saturday. It was Brenda's biggest bash yet. Not just kids. This was a full-blown adult cocktail party. I heard her distinctive, loud, tinny laughter slice through the neighborhood silence around 4 p.m., followed by the clinking of glasses. I peered through the blinds. Dozens of people in expensive, yet trashy, swimwear were packed around the edges of my pool. That was the moment I noticed the side twist. She hadn't just thrown a party. She had hired a professional white-jacketed waiter who was walking around serving tiny skewers, and, most offensively, she'd set up a gorgeous, 3-tiered cake on a small table right at the shallow end of the pool. This wasn't a casual drop-in. This was a wedding reception rehearsal, or something equally high stakes. Oh, sweet mercy, what now? I thought, but the sight of the waiter stepping onto my deck solidified my decision. This was my time. I slipped out to the equipment shed, the hot, sticky air thick with the smell of grilling meat and expensive perfume. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from a terrifying, electric excitement. I pulled the main handle, opening the bottom drain wide, and flipped the switch on the massive submersible pump. The noise was surprisingly muffled by the ambient party chaos, but the water immediately began to move. Not gracefully, but with a vengeance. You could almost hear the great, thirsty gulp of the earth as the pool's ecosystem began its inevitable collapse. Took 45 minutes. 45 minutes of sitting inside, watching the level drop past the tile line, past the first step, past the kneecaps of the guests who were now starting to look confused. The cheap pop music abruptly cut out. Silence. Then, a man's voice, slurred and bewildered. "Hey, is the pool getting smaller?" That was my cue. I walked out onto my deck, casually holding a bottle of lemonade, and watched the chaos unfold. The deep end was now just a sludgy, brown mess, the filter intakes sucking desperately at air. The shallow end was worse. The ground beneath the pool, largely clay, was rapidly liquefying under the draining pressure, turning the final 3 feet of water into a thick, gritty, coffee-colored paste. Brenda was standing near where the cake table had been, her perfectly white linen dress now clinging damply to her. Her expression, moments before I appeared, was pure, magnificent shock. "Brenda!" I called out, my voice falsely bright, waving the lemonade. "Just wanted to let you know I'm going to be resurfacing the pool this week. Thought I'd drain it first. Hope you guys found the exit okay." Then came the scream. It wasn't a party scream. It was a high-pitched, primal shriek of pure, entitled rage. "You absolute psycho! What have you done?" She lunged towards me, but she only made it 2 steps into the shallow-end mud before her foot slipped, sending her, dress first, sprawling face down into the viscous, brown sludge. The professional waiter, attempting to save the 3-tiered cake, stumbled backward and landed on top of her, crushing the masterpiece into a horrifying mixture of frosting, mud, and expensive linen. Did that just happen? The sounds that followed. The squelch of expensive leather sandals being ripped off by the mud. The shouts of the guests trying to hoist themselves onto the slippery deck. The horrible, wet crack of the cake plate were the sweetest symphony I had ever heard. The police arrived, then the Homeowners Association president, both of whom found a disheveled Brenda, covered head to toe in foul-smelling pool mud, screaming about trespassing and property damage. My defense was simple and irrefutable. It was my pool on my property, and I was simply performing necessary maintenance, which I am perfectly within my rights to do. The unauthorized guests and the subsequent contamination were, unfortunately, consequences of her own trespass. The Homeowners Association fined her heavily for the disruption and for the mess her party guests left on the street. The police told her to take it up in civil court, an expense she definitely couldn't afford after paying for the pump rental, the fine, and her guests' dry cleaning bills. As Brenda stood there, utterly defeated, looking less like a Karen and more like a soggy swamp monster, her voice finally breaking into a pathetic croak, she muttered, "You ruined everything." I simply looked at her, the mud drying on her face, the evidence of her hubris sinking into the clay, and offered her a clear, honest reply that felt like the pure, refreshing taste of justice. "No, Brenda," I said, leaning over the fence and finally meeting her eyes without flinching. "You ruined your own party the moment you decided my boundaries didn't apply to you. Some lessons you have to learn the hard way." And I walked back into my house, the lingering scent of mud and expensive failure finally replaced by the clean, quiet air of ownership restored. Boundaries aren't just invisible lines. Sometimes, they're reinforced by 1,000 gallons of fast-draining water.